When a person awakens, something profound happens within the psyche. It is not merely an increase in knowledge or the gathering of spiritual insights. It is a rearrangement of the inner world, a cracking open of the deeper layers of the self. And once this shift occurs, the world you once tolerated can no longer be carried so lightly. New clarity demands new boundaries, because awakening is not just a rising, it is a separation. The light within you must be protected, for not everyone you meet will celebrate it. Some will try to smother it, some will try to feed on it, and some will simply fail to understand it. And so, there are 5 types of people you must consciously avoid as you move into this new terrain of your life. First, avoid the ones who cling to the past version of you. These individuals are not malicious, but they are deeply invested in the older mold you have broken out of. They will remind you of your former mistakes, your former fears, your former patterns, not because they love truth, but because your transformation threatens their sense of stability. They want the you that made them comfortable, predictable, manageable. Your awakening disrupts their narrative. When you speak about growth, they translate it as arrogance. When you express new insights, they hear rebellion. These are the people who will pull you backward gently, subtly, emotionally, hoping you will shrink back into who you once were. But you must continue forward. The path ahead cannot be walked by the version of you they prefer. Second, avoid the ones who feed on your energy but give nothing of substance in return. Awakening makes you radiant in a way most cannot articulate. Your presence becomes grounding, your words carry weight. Your aura feels like a source of warmth, and some will gravitate to you only to absorb that light. They come with endless stories of chaos, crisis, and confusion. They come seeking comfort, support, direction, yet offer no intention of healing and no desire to grow. They are not companions on the path. They are emotional parasites who attach themselves to your compassion. If you are not careful, they will exhaust your inner reserves, leaving your spiritual fire dimmed. Protect your energy. Wisdom cannot flow into a cup that only leaks. Third, avoid the ones who fear your independence. Awakening often leads to solitude, not because you reject others, but because you finally understand yourself. You no longer need validation, approval, or external noise to feel real. This frightens those who depended on your uncertainty. They will criticize your solitude, calling it isolation. They will question your decisions, calling them reckless. They will try to insert themselves into your life not out of love, but out of fear that you are slipping out of their control. These individuals are unsettled by your inner strength. Your clarity exposes their own lack of direction, and instead of facing their shadows, they attempt to dim yours. Step away. Freedom has its own sacred atmosphere, and not everyone is meant to breathe it with you. Fourth, avoid the ones who mock your inner work. Some people fear anything that comes from the depths of the psyche. They fear reflection, self-honesty, silence, dreams, intuition, anything that challenges the surface-level world they cling to. When you speak of inner change, they will laugh. When you share insights, they will label them strange or unnecessary. They shield themselves from their own inner darkness by ridiculing anyone who dares to confront theirs. These individuals are not just dismissive, they are dangerous to a growing soul. Their cynicism attempts to poison your curiosity. Their fear tries to suffocate your exploration. Avoid them, not in anger, but in recognition that some minds cannot yet comprehend the landscape you are stepping into. Fifth, avoid the ones who pretend to awaken faster than you. These are the self-proclaimed enlightened individuals who wear spirituality like an ornament rather than a path. Their words are polished, their posture serene, but their shadow remains untouched. They speak loudly of wisdom but live quietly in their old patterns. They will compete with your growth, trying to appear superior. They will mask insecurity with mystical language. Their presence can distort your compass, for they create a false map of awakening, one that distracts you from your genuine transformation. Your journey is inward, authentic and unfolding. Do not let those who perform enlightenment make you doubt the sincerity of your own evolution. As you continue to awaken, remember that avoidance is not an act of hatred, it is an act of preservation. You are protecting the part of you that is still forming, still delicate, still learning to stand in its new truth. Keep your distance from what drains your spirit, warps your clarity, or pulls you into patterns you have already outgrown. The path of awakening is narrow not because few may walk it, but because not everything can be carried upon it. Some people are meant to stay where your journey began, not where it is taking you. When a person awakens, the internal landscape shifts in ways that can be subtle at first, but profound in their long-term effects. Awakening is not simply a recognition of external truths or an accumulation of knowledge. It is an intimate confrontation with the layers of the self that have remained hidden, neglected, or repressed. It is the moment when the familiar world of the psyche cracks open, revealing spaces that were once unconscious, revealing desires, fears, memories, and potentials that have been silently shaping your life without your conscious awareness. In this state, the self begins to reconfigure itself, and with this transformation comes a sensitivity that did not exist before. The awakening individual experiences a heightened awareness not only of the world outside, but of the subtle energies, intentions, and unconscious currents flowing through human interaction. One of the earliest and most significant realizations after this awakening is that not everyone who was once close or familiar will remain compatible with your evolving consciousness. There are people who cling to the version of you that existed before, who remember you in the shape of habits, limitations, fears, and old narratives that you have begun to leave behind. They are not necessarily hostile, and they may not intend harm, but their attachment is rooted in comfort, predictability, and a need to maintain the equilibrium that they have always known in their interaction with you. These individuals thrive on consistency, on the old scripts that dictated who you were and how you should behave. And when you begin to emerge in a new form, they feel disoriented, threatened, or anxious. The deeper truth is that their resistance is not entirely about you. It is about the world within them that your transformation touches. They have created a sense of security around your old patterns, and your emergence into awareness challenges their own narrative, their assumptions, and the psychological architecture they rely on when you speak. They may misinterpret your words as judgment or criticism. When you act, they may perceive your independence as rebellion. This is not because they lack affection or goodwill. It is because the shift within you has disrupted the equilibrium in which they were comfortable, and human consciousness, when confronted with the unknown or unfamiliar, often reacts defensively. They want the version of you that is familiar, manageable, predictable, and they unconsciously attempt to draw you back into that version through subtle pressures, emotional appeals, reminders of past mistakes, or encouragements to conform. The old self that they cling to is like a mirror of their own unexamined world. They fear that if you continue to evolve, their reflection of themselves in your old image will vanish, leaving them unmoored in ways they cannot easily recognize. Awakening demands a detachment from such energies, not out of malice, but out of necessity, because your transformation cannot be contained or negotiated into the frameworks of the past. The awakened individual must navigate these interactions with a combination of awareness, compassion, and firm boundaries, recognizing that the people who cling to old versions of themselves and others are not enemies but obstacles to be acknowledged, understood, and circumvented for the sake of growth. The challenge lies in maintaining empathy while also refusing to regress into the roles, expectations, and limitations that no longer serve your evolving self. These individuals may appeal to nostalgia, recalling shared histories, old memories, or moments when you were less aware and more malleable to their influence. They may employ subtle psychological strategies, framing your growth as abandonment, arrogance, or ingratitude, and in doing so they hope to elicit guilt, hesitation, or compliance. Awakening requires the recognition that such responses are projections of their own fears and insecurities, and that succumbing to them would be a surrender of the hard-won clarity that you have begun to cultivate. Your inner world has expanded. The dimensions of consciousness you now inhabit cannot coexist comfortably with the containment of others' expectations and attachments to your former self. Growth is inherently disruptive, and while the disruption can be gentle or dramatic, it is unavoidable. It requires that you distinguish between genuine companionship and attachment to a familiar pattern, between love that supports your evolution and attachment that seeks to anchor you to the past. This process is rarely comfortable because human relationships are often intertwined with emotional histories, shared experiences, and obligations that are difficult to disentangle. The awakening individual must learn to navigate these emotional landscapes with discernment, recognizing that retreat from certain relationships is not abandonment but preservation. Each interaction with a person who clings to the past becomes a test of inner resolve, a mirror reflecting areas where you may still unconsciously seek approval, validation, or acceptance from others. In this sense, avoidance is not merely a physical or social distancing. It is an internal exercise of sovereignty, a conscious choice to honor the boundaries that your emerging self requires. As you encounter reminders of who you once were, you may feel guilt, confusion, or the weight of expectation pressing against your growth. This is natural, because the human psyche is wired to resist loss of connection, and the mind often interprets detachment as rejection or betrayal. The challenge lies in reframing these feelings, to recognize that by protecting the evolving self, you are honoring the authentic trajectory of consciousness, and that your detachment is a necessary act of fidelity to the truth within. Those who cling to your former self may oscillate between support and resistance, expressing concern while simultaneously attempting to tether you to old patterns. Their insistence can manifest as subtle reminders of your former limitations, comments that undermine your confidence, or encouragements to return to familiar habits. The awakened individual must learn to identify these patterns, not with judgment but with clarity, discerning which interactions are nourishing and which are draining, which serve growth and which hinder it. This discernment becomes a crucial skill, because the awakened state is fragile in its early stages, and exposure to energies that resist change can stall or distort the development of consciousness. The process of avoidance, in this context, is not an act of cruelty or abandonment, but a recognition of the natural dynamics of growth. It is an acknowledgement that not everyone is equipped to meet you where you are, that some cannot perceive the depth of transformation occurring within, and that attempting to reconcile incompatible psychic spaces can be detrimental to both parties. By choosing to step away, you create the conditions for your continued evolution, allowing the psyche to integrate new insight, to reorganize previously hidden aspects of self, and to cultivate a sense of wholeness unburdened by external expectation. The individuals who cling to the past serve as a necessary contrast, a reflection of the life you once inhabited, highlighting the depth of change that has taken place and emphasizing the courage required to walk a path that diverges from familiar terrain. Their presence, while challenging, reinforces the importance of conscious boundary setting, self-awareness, and the cultivation of resilience. In essence, avoiding those who cling to the former self is an act of fidelity to the awakening journey. It requires vigilance, compassion, and unwavering attention to the internal shifts that define this stage of growth. It calls for the acknowledgement that not all connections are meant to endure the metamorphosis, and that the preservation of psychic integrity is paramount. As you move forward, the recognition of these dynamics allows the awakened individual to engage with the world selectively, to seek relationships that resonate with evolving consciousness, and to avoid entanglement that serve the past rather than the unfolding present. After awakening, one of the most delicate challenges an individual faces is recognizing the energies they allow into their inner world. As the consciousness expands, it becomes clear that not all connections are mutually enriching. Some people exist in your life not to grow alongside you, but to feed upon the vitality, clarity, and emotional depth that you now radiate. These are individuals who, whether consciously or unconsciously, take without giving, who consume attention, empathy, and energy without offering anything of substance in return. Awakening sharpens your sensitivity to such dynamics, revealing patterns that were previously invisible or overlooked because your former self was enmeshed in habitual tolerance, people-pleasing, or unconscious submission to others' needs. Energy-draining individuals may appear charming, appealing, or needy at first, but the subtle ways they sap your presence become evident over time. They present themselves as companions, as confidants, or as seekers of advice, and you may initially respond with generosity because your nature is inclined towards support and understanding. Yet awakening awakens discernment, the capacity to see beneath surface appearance, to the intentions, dependencies, and unresolved patterns that drive behavior. These individuals often carry unresolved chaos within themselves, and they project that chaos outward, seeking anchors in those who are evolving, aware, or emotionally balanced. Your energy, once freely available, becomes a target because it represents the stability, clarity, and integration that they have not yet achieved. The interaction with such people can be subtle at first, appearing as endless questions, repeated crises, emotional storms, or a constant need for reassurance. You may find that conversations leave you depleted, that encounters with them require recovery, or that your inner calm feels disrupted by their presence. This is because psychic energy, like sunlight, can be absorbed or reflected, and those who live in shadow often seek to draw light into their orbit without reflecting it back. The danger is not merely fatigue, it is the slow erosion of the internal equilibrium that awakening has nurtured. Over time, repeated exposure to energy-draining individuals can blur the clarity you have cultivated, dull the insights you have gained, and weaken the boundaries that are necessary for sustaining the awakened state. Awakening is not simply a personal illumination. It is a cultivation of resilience, an ability to navigate life with conscious attention to what nourishes the psyche and what diminishes it. Recognizing those who drain your energy requires honesty, introspection, and often a painful acknowledgement that not everyone who seeks your presence intends to honor it. The awakened self begins to notice patterns in which certain people consistently leave emotional residue, subtle tension, or exhaustion that is disproportionate to the interaction. These patterns are signals, reflections of how energy flows and where it is being misdirected. Ignoring them or rationalizing them as normal human dynamics can lead to stagnation or regression. Avoidance, in this context, is not an act of selfishness, but an act of preservation. It is a conscious recognition that energy is finite, that emotional and psychic resources must be stewarded, and that growth is facilitated not by indiscriminate engagement, but by selective interaction with those who mirror, support, and respect your evolving self. The process of identifying energy-draining individuals often begins with reflection on emotional aftermaths of encounters. You may notice that certain conversations leave you anxious, that certain people elicit defensiveness, irritability, or fatigue. These are clues pointing to imbalances in the dynamic, revealing the ways in which your energy is being extracted without reciprocity. The awakened mind begins to map these relationships, discerning patterns of consumption and depletion. And this discernment is not judgmental but analytical, recognizing the natural flows of psychic energy in human interaction. Furthermore, such individuals may employ subtle manipulation or emotional appeals that make disengagement difficult. They may frame their needs as urgent, their struggles as exceptional, or their dependence as unavoidable. The awakened individual must recognize that responding to these pressures does not equate to compassion if it comes at the cost of one's inner integrity. True compassion involves discernment, the ability to give without losing oneself, and the wisdom to withhold energy from dynamics that perpetuate imbalance. Avoiding those who drain your energy is a commitment to the sanctity of your consciousness. It is an acknowledgement that personal evolution requires an environment that nurtures reflection, insight, creativity, and emotional balance. It is a recognition that psychic energy is a currency that must be invested wisely, and that surrendering it indiscriminately undermines the very growth that awakening seeks to cultivate. In practice, this avoidance manifests in setting boundaries, limiting exposure, and, when necessary, disengaging entirely from relationships that consistently deplete your inner reserves. The goal is not punishment, revenge, or disdain. It is protection of the inner ecosystem that supports the development of insight, resilience, and presence. Additionally, the presence of energy-draining individuals can mask or distort the signals of authentic connection. When surrounded by people who consume rather than contribute, the awakened individual may begin to doubt the sincerity of others, lose trust in relational authenticity, or become fatigued in discerning genuine interaction. By removing or distancing oneself from these draining dynamics, clarity is restored. The contrast between what consumes and what nourishes becomes evident, illuminate the pathways of relationship that support growth rather than obstruct it. These individuals often exist in patterns of dependency that are invisible until one's consciousness expands sufficiently to perceive them. They may not act with overt intention to harm, but their unconscious habits of extraction become obstacles to the free flow of awareness, creativity, and emotional equilibrium. Awakening is as much about learning to navigate these subtle currents as it is about discovering internal truths, because consciousness exists within relational fields as well as within the self. Protecting oneself from energy drains is exercise in sovereignty, in the cultivation of inner authority, and in the conscious shaping of one's environment. By recognizing and avoiding these patterns, the awakened individual gains not only psychic preservation but also a deeper understanding of the dynamics of human interaction, the subtleties of intention, and the ways in which presence itself can be gifted or consumed. The process teaches the value of attentiveness, the cultivation of discernment, and the wisdom of selective engagement, demonstrating that true growth is not merely internal but relational, and that the quality of relationships profoundly influences the trajectory of evolution. The journey involves repeated practice, reflection, and courage, because avoidance may be socially uncomfortable, emotionally challenging, or counterintuitive in a culture that prizes accessibility, support, and constant availability. However, the awakened self learns that true generosity is measured not by depletion but by conscious contribution, that sustainability in giving requires discernment, and that the preservation of the inner flame allows it to illuminate both one's own path and the paths of others who are ready to walk alongside. With integrity after awakening, the sense of independence becomes both a blessing and a challenge. Awakening illuminates the internal landscape, revealing that one's sense of self, clarity, and authenticity cannot be dictated, controlled, or confined by the expectations of others. As consciousness expands, the awakened individual discovers a profound inner sovereignty, a recognition that their journey, insights, and choices belong to them alone. This newfound independence can be unsettling to those who have long relied on your previous dependencies, habitual behaviors, or insecurities to maintain their own sense of control, relevance, or familiarity. People who fear your independence are often unaware of the depth of their response. They may express concern, offer unsolicited advice, or employ subtle emotional pressures to maintain their influence over you, framing it as love, friendship, or guidance. Yet beneath these behaviors lies a fundamental discomfort with the changes your awakening has produced. They are unsettled by your autonomy, by your ability to make decisions without seeking permission, by your refusal to conform to old patterns, and by your growing capacity to walk a path defined by your own discernment rather than the comfort of familiar relationships. Their fear is not simply of change in you. It is a reflection of their own unconscious attachment to stability, predictability, and control, and your emergence into independence exposes the rigidity of their own psychological structures. These individuals may attempt to undermine your self-reliance in subtle ways, presenting scenarios in which your choices seem risky, your judgments flawed, or your priorities misguided. They may cloak their attempts in concern, presenting questions as doubts, suggestions as imperatives, or reminders as warnings. In this, they test your clarity, attempting to provoke hesitation, guilt, or a sense of obligation to the old dynamics that no longer serve you. Awakening demands a profound inner vigilance, the ability to discern between genuine guidance and influence rooted in fear, attachment, or control. Those who fear your independence often respond to the freedom you embody with confusion, anxiety, or resentment, because independence is a mirror reflecting the limitations within themselves. They may find it difficult to witness your refusal to bend to expectations, your capacity to honor your own truths, and your courage to act in alignment with your evolving consciousness. This fear can manifest as subtle attempts to pull you back into the roles, identities, and limitations of your former self, to induce compliance, or to manipulate circumstances so that your autonomy is diminished. The awakened individual must recognize these dynamics not as personal attacks but as reflections of universal psychological patterns, understanding that the reactions of others are often projections of their own fears, insecurities, and unexamined shadows. To engage with such individuals without being ensnared by their unconscious attempts requires the cultivation of firm boundaries, the capacity for introspective discernment, and the willingness to protect the integrity of one's independent self. Independence, after awakening, is not merely the absence of reliance on others. It is the conscious cultivation of inner authority, the ability to make choices informed by insight, awareness, and authentic alignment rather than obligation, expectation, or fear of judgment. This autonomy allows the awakened individual to move fluidly through the relational landscape, engaging with others without surrendering the sovereignty of their own consciousness. Those who fear your independence may oscillate between subtle encouragements and undermining behaviors, testing the resilience of your boundaries, the steadiness of your focus, and the clarity of your purpose. Their presence challenges the awakened individual to maintain discernment, to cultivate patience, and to respond with equanimity rather than reactivity. The interactions become mirrors reflecting both the strength of your inner independence and the areas where residual attachment, insecurity, or doubt may still reside. It is in this tension that the awakened self learns to assert its autonomy, to honor its own trajectory, and to engage selectively with the world in ways that support continued growth. The process of avoiding or distancing oneself from those who fear your independence is not an act of rejection, but a recognition that not all relational dynamics are equipped to sustain the evolved self. It is an acknowledgement that freedom, clarity, and authenticity require space to flourish, and that certain presences in your life, however well-meaning, may inadvertently anchor you to patterns of limitation, compromise, or conformity. Independence, after awakening, also involves the cultivation of internal validation. Those who fear your autonomy may attempt to instill doubt by questioning your choices, values, or understanding, and the awakened individual must rely upon internal authority rather than external affirmation. This internal validation is a recognition that truth, insight, and clarity are cultivated within the psyche and must be protected from the interference of fear-driven projections from others. The awakened individual learns to differentiate between influence grounded in wisdom, share, insight, or mutual respect, and influence rooted in fear, insecurity, or attachment. This discernment becomes essential in navigating social, familial, and professional relationships, ensuring that growth is not hindered by the unconscious attempts of others to control or limit freedom. Those who fear your independence often operate unconsciously, unaware of the impact of their actions or intentions, and this calls for compassion in conjunction with firm boundaries. Awareness of their fear allows for understanding without capitulation, for recognition without surrender, and for engagement without compromise of the autonomous self. The awakened individual must continually refine the capacity to recognize subtle pressures, manipulative strategies, or attempts to elicit compliance, understanding that these are not necessarily malicious, but are indicative of the psychological patterns at play. In cultivating independence, one also learns the value of solitude, reflection, and self-reliance. The awakened state thrives in spaces where the mind can process insight, where the psyche can integrate experience, and where consciousness can explore without interference from external expectations or pressures. Those who fear your independence may challenge the need for such solitude, questioning its necessity, framing it as isolation, or interpreting it as withdrawal. The awakened individual recognizes the importance of these inner practices, understanding that independence is fortified through reflection, discernment, and the conscious cultivation of personal authority. The presence of fear-driven individuals also provides an opportunity for deepening self-awareness. Their reactions, insecurities, and attempts at influence reveal the persistence of attachment, unresolved shadows, and areas where the awakened self may still seek external validation. In observing these dynamics, one gains insight into both the inner and relational dimensions of independence, learning to navigate the social world without sacrificing the integrity of the evolving psyche. Avoiding or limiting interaction with those who fear your autonomy is therefore both a protective and educational practice. It allows the awakened individual to conserve energy, maintain clarity, and cultivate a relational field that supports rather than constrains the development of consciousness. In this way, independence becomes not only a state of self-possession but also a tool for discerning authentic relationships, creating a life aligned with evolving insight, and preserving the integrity of the journey. The cultivation of independence after awakening requires courage, awareness, and the willingness to navigate discomfort, because those who fear autonomy may resist, challenge, or attempt to draw you back into patterns of old dependence. Yet the awakened individual learns to trust in their own capacity to discern, to protect, and to act in alignment with the evolving self, understanding that true freedom is inseparable from the responsibility to maintain the integrity, clarity, and authenticity of one's consciousness. After awakening, the clarity of insight often exposes the illusions that others construct around themselves, the masks they wear to navigate life, and the ways in which they project an image of growth, wisdom, or enlightenment, without having undertaken the inner work necessary to sustain such claims. These individuals are not always overtly malicious. Rather, they perform the role of awakening or spiritual evolution as a means of creating an identity, gaining approval, or asserting superiority. They speak in the language of insight, yet their words are divorced from integration, and their actions betray a lack of genuine transformation. The awakened individual quickly begins to recognize the dissonance between what is professed and what is lived, and in doing so, they understand that these performative premises can be harmful to the delicate process of inner evolution. Such people may initially appear appealing, offering companionship, guidance, or insight, and they often project an aura of knowledge or accomplishment that attracts those who are beginning their own journey. The subtle danger lies not in confrontation, but in imitation, comparison, and distraction. The awakened self, still in the process of integrating new awareness, may unconsciously be drawn into the orbit of performative individuals, mistaking their displays of wisdom for authentic mastery, or believing that proximity to them will accelerate growth. In this dynamic, the authentic journey is compromised by external influence, and the psyche risks adopting patterns, attitudes, or beliefs that are incongruent with its true evolution. Those who perform awakening often do so with an emphasis on appearance, ritual, or rhetoric, creating a veneer of insight while leaving the shadow aspects of the self untouched. They may speak of detachment, compassion, or transcendence, yet in private they operate from insecurity, desire for control, or unresolved emotional patterns. Their presence can distort perception, leading the awakened individual to question their own progress, to doubt the validity of their experiences, or to feel inadequate in the face of another seemingly advanced state. Avoiding these individuals is therefore an act of preserving authenticity and protecting the subtle energies necessary for genuine transformation. The awakened consciousness is particularly sensitive to projection, imitation, and pretense, and engaging with those who perform enlightenment can create confusion, comparison, and distraction. These dynamics can manifest subtly, such as through the elevation of their ideas above your own, minimization of your insights, or the encouragement of conformity to their model of awakening. The danger is that one may begin to chase an externalized version of growth, measuring one's own development against the curated image of another,